Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the new Tier 9 light tank, the ATAC. So this is not going to be a full in-depth review into the two guns because I believe those are two pretty interesting guns, so they would deserve their own separate video. But this will be one going over the tank overall fairly quickly, I'll try it to be. But this is a fairly interesting tank, so it does have quite a few unique aspects about it, such as its two different autoloader guns, one with a 6-shot burst, one with a 12-shot burst. But let's get right into the armor. Now, again, I've been pretty busy, came back from traveling, then to Tank Fest, so I haven't quite had the time to add all the reviews, but I'll be starting that from today. But here we can see the ATAC with its armor against a 105mm gun in these top two images. You can see that its upper plate is an auto ricochet, and that is because it is 35mm thick, meaning anything larger than 105mm will overmatch, and you can see that with this image below where it is showing a 122mm gun. So this is just very weak armor against anything larger than 105, but against 105s it can be a bit troll. You can also see switching to heat, of course, gets rid of that auto ricochet. But its armor against HE isn't very good. You can see against only 61mm the entire very big lower plate is penetrable, some areas of the turret front, and of course the cupola, which is only 25mm thick. You can also see the side of the hull is very weak and fairly large. It does not have any space protection. These side skirts are really just for show and they don't give you any extra help. And of course the side armor only 25, so essentially anything at any angle can go through that. There is one more thing you need to note. The upper parts of the turret are 30mm thick, meaning anything with a 90mm gun will struggle to go through those, as it is an auto ricochet, as you can see here. But that is it for armor, essentially very weak, with a troll upper plate to certain gun calibers. But here we can see this tank has two guns, one 3x2, one 4x3, and both are 90mm. So the first gun, the 3x2, it has AP HESH HE. In fact, these two guns have the same stats in all areas except for their alpha damage and their burst time. So AP HESH HE for both guns, 235 penetration on AP, 155 on HESH, and 45 on HE, again for both guns. AP penetration is actually quite good, however the HESH is poor at 155 and you actually can't go through much at all. So on this tank, sort of like the Destiny, its penetration isn't really good enough to be using the HESH as your main ammo. Your AP is still the main ammo. HE penetration is okay considering that this is a 90mm gun. Damage 160, 200 on HESH and 240 on regular HE. But this tank does do this damage in 2-shot bursts, so in fact it's more like 320, 400 and 480 if you do of course hit both shots in the burst. So there are 3 shells in the magazine, or I should say 3 shots or 3 bursts, and each burst does 2 shots. That's why it is called a 3x2. So a total of 6 of these shots go out per magazine, and intra-clip reload is 1.4 seconds, intra-burst reload is 0.67. So this tank has a 17.2 second reload, which is pretty good for an autoloader. It's not bad at all, and 2,783 DPM on AP, or 3,478 on HESH. Very good DPM on both ammo types, and this is definitely noticeable in battle. When you do hit all your shots, damage racks up very fast, and this is very impressive for a light tank. Very quickly, I'll just show how this gun fires so you can sort of understand how it actually works. So here we are with the 3x2 gun on the ATAC, and note how this gun is going to fire. 1.4 seconds between each of these 3 bursts, and then within each burst is a 0.67 second intra-burst reload with 2 shots in each burst. So watch how this gun shoots, and also note the slow shell velocity of the HESH. This gun has 2.6 or 2.8 seconds aim time, which is actually very fast, and that's due to having great base aim time of 1.7 seconds. So it does aim very nice, and you do feel this in battle despite its fairly unimpressive 0.335 dispersion, considering its quote-unquote low alpha, and its gun handling of 0.11, 0.12, 0.11 is pretty decent for a light tank, but nothing special. One of the biggest issues of this tank is its shell velocity though. You can see 750 on AP is fairly slow, though it is definitely still usable, but the main issue is 300 meters per second on HESH and HE, and this is the same for both guns. So the HESH and HE are really only very close range use, or against extremely just not moving tanks. But you can see also gun depression is not quite what it seems, 7 degrees over the front, even though in-game it says 9 degrees. It means 9 degrees everywhere else, over the sides, over the rear, but on the front it's -7. But that is the first gun, the 3x2. Let's move to the 4x3, which is also a 90mm. Just like I said, almost all the stats are the same. Same ammo, same penetration. The damage is different, doing 90 on AP, 115 on HESH, and 140 on HE. The difference with this gun is that it does much more shells per magazine. So the other gun did a total of 6 of these shots per magazine. This gun does 12. So it has 4 shots in the magazine. Each shot does 3 shells. So in total it does 12. And with a 0.33 second intra-burst reload, it is noticeably faster than the other gun, and 1.3 second intra-clip. However, do note, this 0.33 does look good, but the other gun only shoots 2 shells, this one has to do 3, which comes out to 0.66 anyway, which is almost the same as the other gun. But I'll show you very quickly sort of how this gun fires. This tank, it does still have the same reload, but more DPM, of course, because this just has 4 shots rather than 3 in the magazine, or bursts, I should say. So very high DPM, almost 3000 on AP, almost 4000 on HESH. Very impressive. So here we are on Copperfield with the 4x3 gun. Note how this gun shoots. 1.3 second intra-clip between each of these 4 bursts, and then 0.33 second intra-burst. So within each burst there is 2 of those 0.33 second intra-clips, as each burst does have 3 shells. Also note the shell velocity. So here's how the gun shoots. So of course, other than those stats in the DPM and damage, the rest of the stats are same. So the same aim time, same base aim time, same dispersion, same gun handling, and the same shell velocities and gun depression. So overall, which gun is better is sort of up to you to decide. I've heard quite a few different things from different players. Some like the 2-shot gun for some reason, not me personally, and some like the 3-shot gun. Well, sorry, the 3-shot burst gun, which is definitely the one for me as well. But next, let's move to mobility. The top speed is 65, which is pretty average for a light tank, pretty decent. Reverse speed, 21, not the best for a light tank. Many of them do 23 or 24, but still it's okay. At least it's not 18 like the old Batchat Avenir. Next, acceleration rate is almost 30, which is pretty good for a base acceleration, and this tank only weighs 24 tons, which is, again, fairly average weight for a light tank. On hard terrain, it does the same acceleration as shown, with a traverse speed of almost 65 per second, which is quite good for a light. On medium terrain, though, it is much less impressive at 23.8 horsepower per ton, which is definitely on the lower end of light tanks, and you really do feel this in battle. And its traverse is 54 degrees per second on medium terrain, again caused by this terrain resistance difference of 0.2. However, this tank isn't really about its mobility, it's about the funny guns, which is definitely worth the trade-off in terms of your mobility. But next, consumables, I definitely run reticle calibration because this tank does have access to it, so you may as well use it. It will come into use at long range, or if you've been moving very quickly and you have to quickly get off an accurate shot, it does still have its uses. Next, restoration pack, of course, because you need to keep your tank, well, stocked up and not damaged. And then engine power boost, I'm using this because of course the tank is a light tank and I do want to maximize on that mobility, especially when it isn't the most impressive. Provisions, it is just ordinary as this tank doesn't have any special ones. I am using the usual setup just to go with the best possible DPM I can have. Ammo wise, you do have to note that this doesn't equip it in magazines, so on this gun, the 12-shot one, I do have 60 HESH because I am using mainly the AP ammo, just because that AP penetration is much more consistent along with the shell velocity. But do make sure to take enough HESH because it does still do tons of damage in close range. Next, calibrated shells definitely, because this tank doesn't have a high penetration premium round, and it has HESH, which, while its penetration is very low, making it hard to use, and its shell velocity is low, making it hard to use, it does still have massive use in close range, where you can just absolutely decimate other tanks with how much damage you deal in such a short time. So definitely go with calibrated shells. You don't need vents, you're accurate, you're relatively quick enough, and it is fine in that aspect. Next, defense system and improved optics. Of course, you want to be spotting your enemies, and this tank has pretty decent view range. Engine accelerator, again, this tank, not the best on mobility, you do want to be improving that acceleration rate. Improved assembly, of course, this tank doesn't have any armor. If you were thinking about using enhanced armor to make that upper plate auto ricochet to higher caliber guns, don't. It's not going to make a difference. Between the calibers of 105 and 110, there are almost no guns in the whole game. There's the Tortoise with a 106, there's the Soul Eater with a 108. That is about it in terms of the tanks you will meet, and that is such a niche situation you really won't be needing it. Next, gun laying drive or supercharger. You can use either. Personally, I'd probably recommend the supercharger just because this tank has terrible shell velocity on the HESH, and if you do want to make use of that, it can be very useful. But if you do play in close range, which I mainly do, use gun laying drive, which is the choice I have made because I have found myself being very close range in this tank for the majority of the time I'm playing it. Next, the stabilizer or refined gun. Either can work because this tank's accuracy isn't amazing, but because you do burst shots so fast, you could also use the stabilizer, which is the choice I've gone with. Of course, toolbox and delivery system for the final two. So I do have two replays in the ATAC. This first one on Rockfield is going to be using the 3x2 gun. Of course, both of these battles are going to be top tier, as both were played when I still had the preferential matchmaking, but I have played a ton in the ATAC because I had it for testing. The tank really hasn't changed that much since then, so I do know sort of how it plays. I do also plan to do more videos on this tank because I love playing it, it is so much fun, and I believe the two different guns need separate in-depth looks at them. This video is just to look at the tank overall, combining its armor and its mobility with sort of how the guns are. But here you'll see I'm taking a rather forward position in this bush to try and see where the enemies are. Unfortunately, this T-54E1 is on his own. I'm not going to push around because there are probably tank destroyers sitting in the back. But you can see there, against the Centurion, sort of the issue I have personally with this 3x2 gun. This isn't my preferred gun. I don't like the intraclip on this one. It does feel just a bit too long, the delay between the first and the second shot, and it kind of throws off your aim sometimes. You do definitely need to be following the tank with your gun while it is moving. You can sort of see if the enemy is stationary on the first shot and then they suddenly move, it can be sort of a gamble whether you hit the second shot, because of course they did move. But you can see here, so far 2 magazines, 1450 damage. Pretty good, considering I did miss a fair few shells of those magazines, and I haven't used the HESH. Now this tank definitely not one for the inexperienced player, because of course it is a light tank. Light tank gameplay is harder than a medium or a heavy, of course. And then combine that with this weird auto-loader and the use of HESH and having terrible shell velocity does make it quite a skilled vehicle to be playing right. But of course, doing so much damage in such a short amount of time does mean that any player can really get lucky and get a massive damage game. You'll also see I've blocked a few shots so far, and that is due to this tank's auto-ricochet upper plate. So sometimes it can work out. But you can see here, this is where the HESH is amazing. It's in close range, I'm not having to worry about the shell velocity, and the enemies are just so close that I don't really have to aim much to be able to make use out of that. But you can just see how fast this tank racks up damage, because it does have very good DPM, and that's on the 3x2, which has around 200 less DPM than the other gun. You can see just how quick I am doing the damage to this K2, and now I am up to 4K, just like that in this relatively fast battle. Not going to get another shot, but of course my reload is 17.2, so expected. However, in that battle we did do 4,000 damage rather quickly, getting also a fair bit of assistance, which does give us a first class mastery. Without any credit boosters on, I did still make 130,000 credits in that battle, but you do have to remember first class and high caliber give extra credits. But even with that gun, which is the lower DPM gun, you can see how the tank racks up damage just very fast, especially if you're able to use the HESH. Again, with the low penetration of this gun, your main ammo is still going to be AP, just because the HESH has such low shell velocity, such low penetration, does make it quite hard to use in many situations. However, with this gun, the 4x3, you will see the HESH use again in this battle. You can see I activate speed boost to get up on this hill, and there are 2 heavies rushing forward, and this Skoda T56 does just completely YOLO forward for me. Luckily though, he doesn't manage to hit me, and that is something you do have to notice there. The Skoda would have been able to shoot me had he not really reversed then shot, because this tank is massive. It's a huge light tank. Here you'll see the HESH use on this tank. 362 the first one, and then just completely dead within a few seconds of my first shot. You do have to remember, for this gun, the average damage on HESH is 345, which is pretty impressive considering it's 90 damage on standard ammo. But here you'll see again, I do try go for the HESH on the T92. And I do, again, another 1,200 damage to that player. You can see the first 2 shots did miss because the T92 was moving, and like I said, you do have to follow the enemies while you are shooting, which isn't a common thing that many players would be used to. It's something that you do have to try make yourself used to while playing this tank. But there you could see the exact reason why I love playing this tank. It just shoots so many shells so quickly, it does a ton of damage, and I was able to completely clear the Action 10 while still having enough shells for the Jagdtiger 8.8, and that wasn't even using HESH on the Action 10. And another thing I like about this tank, since you get 3 shells per magazine, you can just shoot in the general direction of an enemy, like that I just did there, and you can hope that one of them will hit. You've got 12 chances, so if an enemy is on around 90 hit points, you know, they're probably going to be dead, as you could see with that defender getting shut down with the last shot of my 3-shot burst there. But here you'll see I am on the front lines against this SU. He shoots the ground, trying to bait me probably, and then he just YOLOs forward. But luckily my team is camping around, so I do manage to survive that situation. But here you'll see one last enemy, the AC-15. I'm going to try flank around and hopefully use the HESH on their sides, but AC-15 does have very good side armor, so I'm not able to do that. I do switch back to the standard ammo and just use that. But you can see there, another relatively quick game. But this gun, of course, with its very high DPM of 3000 or 3800 with HESH, it can just rack up that damage so fast. And you can see that here, 4500 damage dealt, an ace tanker and a high caliber and a top gun, which does mean I make a ton of credits. But yeah, that is the ATAC. A short review for this one, as it's hard to go in depth into these two guns without doing full separate videos, as this tank is just very interesting. But yeah, ATAC, it is in store in the linked bundles, unfortunately. I do hope Wargaming does release it in the regular crates this Friday, as Friday's usually when they do release new tanks. But for any light tank player, any player who likes to have just a ton of shells to shoot out and the high damage burst, the ATAC is definitely one to try and get. Of course, not gambling in crates, but if it does ever come back for gold in the store or in the auctions, definitely go for this tank. It is a lot of fun to play. Opinions are mixed about whether this tank is actually good or not. Personally, for me, it has performed very well, and I do believe it is a very good tank, just because you can do a ton of damage, even if it is massive, even if it doesn't have good armor, even if it isn't that fast of a light tank. Your firepower is completely undeniable, and it does just do insane amounts of damage in such a short amount of time, which does make it worth playing, and of course it is very fun to play. But yeah, that is it for the ATAC. Do try to get it if it does ever come for gold, as it is just a very fun vehicle to play, and of course to do in platoons as well. But yeah, that is it for the ATAC. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be getting on those website reviews starting today.